I want to kind of take you through the process and eventually get to the topics that you'll hear about in these 2 days. But what I had left was a photo image of the traditional cut and paste, which is really what it was in the old days. And what you would have seen, but you don't see there, is a piece of, was you see interleaved little sections from something a postdoc wrote and I wrote, and then real traces of Scotch tape, which marked the composition of the paper. And eventually it was published in this form, and there were little drawings which I made in pencil, and the children of Jane Jorgensen were put through college by the fees that I paid for her to do the drawings in India ink on tracing paper, which were eventually published in this. Okay, the process is now computerized. And here is a paper of 2014. Now you did the calculation yourself in your mind as you heard it, that I published 650 papers in, and you know my age, but it is 55 years of scientific activity. So it's roughly one paper a month, okay? So that's not the world's record. It's not even the record in this department by far. In chemistry department at Cornell, Harold Schrager publishes at the rate of about twice that. But the things are now prepared on a computer. That goes for the drawings. And there are some interesting artistic questions about the drawings when they are prepared on a computer, and the composition. And the submission is often on a template of some sort, so even in submission, it looks fairly close to the published version in appearance. Let's talk a little bit about the research. There are steps in this process which are absolutely essential, and you are, assuming most of you are graduate students and postdocs, you are at the stage where some of these decisions are made. You do the research, you write the paper. Now, who decides when it's time to write? In the beginning, it is usually your advisor who decides who writes it. There are different decisions made at different times. I want to just tell you how my personal approach to this evolved over time. In the beginning, I used to write the papers as a research advisor, the first draft or a good beginning of it. One reason was that making a version was itself a time-consuming process when it had to be typed, and you needed a secretary to do that if you didn't type yourself. One of the most interesting gender changes in our time is that men have learned how to type. You haven't thought about this, but that's one of the things that has changed. But with now, since a version is so easy with a word processor, I never do the first versions, because it's part of the learning process that people write the first versions. But then at some point, I will step in, even in an early version, on the introduction. We'll talk about introductions, perhaps. Who decides who to write? Who writes it? The authors in their order. Number of interesting things to talk about. One of the things that's different between sciences and humanities, there are relatively rarely are there several co-authors, and the papers are usually written by a single person. And there are exceptions. There are collective art forms. You can think of movies and the theater, for instance, and performance of music as such. But you rarely see a play other than music and lyrics where there are two authors. But there were Shakespeare's major competitors, Fletcher and Anderson, was a pair of people who wrote the plays at the time. And that is an interesting thing. And I have written a play with someone. There are special problems in co-authorship in the humanities. And the closer you get to the humanities, those problems surface more. Another thing, how to credit previous work, which work to cite. This is a whole lecture, and I've written a paper about the ethics of citation in Angewandte Chemie together with some co-authors. One way to go back to one interesting thing is that science has resolved for itself pretty well the ethics of giving credit, citation. This has to determine the order of the authors in something, whereas the humanities have a lot of problems with this. Just think about movies. How do you remember movies? Do you remember them by the stars? Do you remember them by the director? Do you ever remember the cinematographer in the movies? That there are real problems in giving credit in things in the humanities. You then have to submit it for a publication. I'll come back here to the journals, which journal, how one decides. I really want to talk about the technical thing because that's what you're concerned with. So the technical process is complicated and there are gatekeepers at every stage. So let's go through this. Let's say you have a paper. The author submitted to a journal. Many of the journals are big, publishing 20,000 pages a year or something like that, when the pages counted. You submit it to the main editor-in-chief. Before it gets on the editor-in-chief's journal, it gets to a subhuman called a technical editor. The purposes of the technical editor are to make the job of eventual publication as easy as possible for the process of publication. It is not for any human, you'll see examples of this in a moment, for any human consumption. But the technical editor, who is very important in this process, goes through your submission and makes sure that your references are in the correct format, because it is in the nature of the authors to ignore what the journal has clearly laid out that you should do, like that the initial should come before the name in one journal and the initial should come after the name in another journal, and people don't use endnote or something like that. So the technical editor, when you have submitted a journal, about half the time, even though I know how things are done and I try very hard, the article is unsubmitted. It's a new word by the technical editor. They essentially cancel the submission because of some technical problem in the manuscript. Okay, to get that straight, it goes to the editor. The editors today in the major chemical journals do not accept even for submission a number of the papers. They do a triage of a certain type, but so that very often they reject it on submission. Oh, they don't say it that way. They say this doesn't fit the purpose of the journal or something like that, which is true. But then the major job of the big editor of the journal is to know which sub-editor should handle it. There's one for theoretical chemistry, there's one for synthetic organic chemistry. They steer it to a sub-editor. In steering it to a sub-editor, you can specify which sub-editor you want it to go to. That specification is totally ignored by the editor. They steer it in part according to the work pressure on the sub-editor. There are obvious reasons. They don't want 1,000 papers going to one sub-editor and 10 papers to another one. But of course, they choose their sub-editors according to the workflow. So it's a natural thing. Okay, the purpose of the sub-editor is not to review the paper, but to know who can review the paper. So they should know the people in the field who are experts in the sub-field of which it goes in. That sub-editor sends it out to 2 to 4, typically, you'll see some example, reviewers or referees. The words are used interchangeably in American English. And the referees' comments, they are admonished to return the comments in 2 to 3 weeks. I hate 2 weeks, but it's actually becoming faster, the whole process. And they are a typical response time, given human nature and given 4 reviewers, might be something like 6 weeks to 2 months, realistically, for most journals. That's pretty good, actually, overall, if you think about the process. Those reviews go back to the sub-editor. They are anonymous. There's another whole thing here about how some people have thought about other views. Should it be a double-blind review? But the normal thing is, of course, and I think this is natural given the inability of people to write papers without referencing their own work more than the work of others, you can identify who the author is. So there's no point in making it blind. The reviews go back to the sub-editor, who will then decide on what to do with the paper, to accept it, to reject it, to say it should be reviewed, it should be resubmitted with major revisions, with minor revisions. Goes back to the authors. The revision goes to the sub-editor. After the revision is done, I'm going to talk to you a good bit about the revisions. After the revision is done, let us say that the review, the decision of the review by the sub-editor is that this is a typical thing, that it needs a major revision. The typical response outcome at this stage. Then you do the revision, goes back to the sub-editor, who then decides whether you've done the revision adequately or not, goes back to the authors, sometimes for several cycles, and finally it's accepted. At this point, it gets in the hands of a second technical editor to assure that now other things are in order. Then eventually you get proof. Since you have put in so much work to make it in a template, and usually the proof and what used to take weeks, the getting of the proof, the actual thing, so it looks like it will be published, now takes days. So it's usually less than a week till you get the proof after the paper is accepted. And then you have to approve it, and then it's finally published. So it's I wanted to sketch this process for you. Now, here is the paper in the way we submitted it. We laid it out pretty well, and including the pictures on the page. And what you write with it is a letter of submission to the editor. At this time, when we did this, which was a few years ago, you put the referees suggested in for the paper in with the letter, but actually you put them at a different place. Everything in the submission is now electronic. There's a place where you put in the reviewers. There is an art to choosing reviewers. You also, incidentally, can tell the editor there are some people you don't want to review your paper. If you put in 7 such people, the paper is very likely to be sent to 4 of those 7 people because you're a bad guy if you've got so many people that you don't want. You have to specify why. A good specification might be that this is a person working directly in the same field and you have had a history of bad interactions with that person. Perfectly okay to say that. But if you say that about 7 people, it reflects on you rather than on the 7 people. So you should never put in more than 1 or at most 2 people that you don't want to review your paper. You should overkill on the number of people that you want to review the paper and their names, because it shows you're not afraid, among other things, that people should review the thing. But also you're making the sub-editor's job easier. The sub-editor is not stupid. They're going to look at the references in the paper and they know the field. They know where to send it to. This letter of submission, this letter goes to the head editor who's going to decide the sub-editor, who's going to mail out the reviews. This letter we submitted is much too long. That second paragraph should be about half the size. The main editor really isn't interested in hearing the whole story. They're interested in just seeing roughly. And there should be no hype in this. Hype turns off the editor in this and puts them on against you in the process in some way. Hype is for granting agencies and for the journalists in the publicity office of your, but not for you must be very careful on controlling the letter of extravagant claims and words which are enhancers, unprecedented, novel. Some even forbid it in the article. Some journals forbid them in the names of the titles of the paper. Okay, so you submit this with this letter. They mail it out, and here was this paper. And in this case, it went to Journal of American Chemical Society, that paper that I showed you. And the editor was a friend of mine, Wes Borden. I was his TA when he was in graduate school. It's as simple as, and we've been friends for 50 years. But he sent it out to 4 reviewers, and here are just the recommendations. In red is the highlighting. First one says publish JACF and minor revisions. Publish without change, says the second editor. The third editor says do not publish. And the fourth, the reviewer says publish elsewhere. I don't have the actual reviews. There are reviews accompanying this. With such, you see here the problem of the sub-editor. He's got to make a decision based on divided opinions. This isn't typical of anything. Yet the whole review process is a process, the context is that of criticism. So you criticize more, perhaps, than you would in other circumstances. It's natural. This is a friend of mine, and they rejected the paper on the basis of 2 good reviews and 2 bad reviews. A friend of yours you might have thought would have taken the paper on the same. It's up in the air. I hope you appreciate the problem of the Supreme Court, except there is no politics here. But there is of the usual kind. Anyway, he rejected. It's okay. He's still a friend. I know the troubles that he has. So we submitted it to another journal. I want to show you some of the actual referees' reports, and because I want this to be fun, and because you have to take this with an attempt at understanding it. Here are some of the reviewers' reports. I'll let you read them yourselves that I've got over the years. Some of them use some slang, so it's a little difficult to understand, but generally you see so what is one to do with this? So the thing to be remarked is just always remember the editors are not stupid. So the reviewers are venting. But not only that, but we are what I see. Of course, I'm sensitive to this as the author, but I see more venting than usual. And the reason is, of course, is that there is some underneath the surface. There is jealousy and envy in any process that involves human beings, operative at some point. And the Nobel Prize overall is something which generates a good bit of that. So where does it surface? Psychologists know where it surfaces. It surfaces in the dark, where you think you are not seen or not heard by someone. So it surfaces in reviews. It's okay, you can counter reviews. The typical statement is, instead of saying this is wrong for such and such reasons, people will say, I would not expect a Nobel laureate to make such a stupid mistake. What's the purpose of saying that? You know what the purpose of saying it is. So the reviewer is not stupid and ignores this. And the reviewer, the editor. Is the reviewer happier as a result of having said so? Some people are, but most people are such that the store of unhappiness residing in them is bottomless. And so the next paper, this comes out again. You've known such people. But I'm the recipient of a lot of this. It was resubmitted to another good journal, Angewandte Chemie, who sent it out to 3 reviewers. All this takes time to do, of course. And here I put in the reviews, and some are good and one is bad, and now the editor takes a decision in the other direction. I don't want to spend too much time on my reviews. Okay, when you get a decision in this letter, the important thing is do not fight. The only result of fighting is more rejection and alienation of the sub-editor. One thing you must not do is to show, if somebody tells you that your paper is a good one and gets rejected, then you must, under no circumstances, quote that favorable statement, whether it's made by a colleague or your mother. You must not quote that statement to the editor. The editor's job is hard enough as it is. And you just have, what you do is you go home and you have a drink of whiskey and you curse the editor in the privacy of your home, together with friends or by yourself, and the next day you resubmit it. You just get over it. It's the only thing you have to do that you can do. If there is any opening, then you revise the paper. And in revising the paper, one thing you should see is think about is who is the audience for what you are doing? For instance, when you do a revision, the audience is not the eventual readers primarily, it's the reviewers of the paper. So the one thing you must do is to make the job easier for them. And so you do not scatter your comments in some crazy way. And what you do is you carefully, let's see if I have an example. I don't have an example here. You carefully gather, the comments are scattered initially of the reviewers. They are not necessarily large. You gather them. You number the points of the reviewer. You pretend to answer every point. You answer every point. It's okay to disagree with the reviewer. The editor will take this, but you have to give a reason. Just say, I disagree with the reviewer. Don't say, the reviewer, thank you, the reviewer, and then proceed not to do anything, obviously. So you have to give the impression, you have to not only give the impression, but do respond to all the comments, as if the reviewers were rational. Incidentally, this is where beginning scientists idealistically think that the world out there is made out of logical people, and especially if they call themselves scientists, they should be logical. What you learn from the reviews of your papers is that perfectly rational people who have money from the National Science Foundation for their research and are professors at major universities are, in fact, not completely rational. And we live in such a world. But the process overall works out. You must be very professional and polite in your answers. This is you. You should be that way in everything. Whatever you do, do not escalate it's no purpose to escalate the conflict with the reviewer. Keep the audience firmly in mind. They are. Now, the technical editors are not interested in the same things that you are. Let me give you an example. A typical description from a journal of how you should submit it, what format the paper should take on submission, is that the figures should be separated from the text, and that the figure captions be collected on a single sheet or a few sheets at the end of the paper. Is that how you read a paper? Is that going to enhance? So what they're suggesting is that you write this in the paper, and then at the end, I don't have here. That's what went out in this version when we took it over to your computer. But at the end were the figures separate and the figure captions. No human being, only a machine wants it in that format. Okay, the editors, the sub-editors, the technical editors are motivated by making the process easier for the journal. The editors are human beings. And so even though the directions to the authors say to do this, what I just told you, but I didn't show you, the editors will send out the paper for review in human form if you submit it. Meaning, of course, that the illustrations, this is a Gesamtkunstwerk, text and figures together make a whole. Especially in chemistry, figures and chemical structures are important. In chemistry, the chemical structures should appear in some way as part of the text. So even the rule that the structure should come at the end of a paragraph can be violated for readability, but certainly not at the end of the paper. You want the paper to be readable, and the editors will go with you So what you tell the editors at the beginning is I'm submitting this in human readable form, but at the end of the process, I will put it into whatever format you want. And they get it. And they'll send it out to the reviewers in that format. The editors, I already said, you have to respect their authority, never invoke authority from outside. The reviewers, their context is, you know what they are. There are special problems for non-native speakers or writers of English, and you should get some friends to improve your English at some point. In general, it's who to write for in the paper. So I have special problems because I'm continually trying to, in some ways, to subvert the format of the scientific article. This is another story which we could talk about. But here is a comment I'm very proud of by a great theoretical chemist, Ernie Davidson, University of Washington. And I made the mistake, don't do this, of submitting 4 papers at the same time. So why is that? It's a recipe for disaster because they're going to say, of course, combine them into one. You've got too many words. So you shouldn't do that. But here is Ernie saying, we've had this discussion many times over the years. The referees consistently urge you to write papers in a terse-style design for other experts. You persist in writing papers intelligible to students and postdocs. That's exactly what I do. Part of the pedagogical strategy is, among other things, repetition. Because I've learned that from teaching freshman chemistry. You will learn that. But sometimes you have to repeat things for people to get it. And also the other part is colloquial language. And that is an interesting question, how much colloquial language you can use. In the written thing is different from the spoken thing, which is why lectures are more interesting than papers. Of course, why you should go to lectures. The most interesting and best structured lectures, incidentally, are coming up before you in the next 2 months in every department at this university. They are the lectures given by people looking for a job because they've got an additional pressure on them to make those intelligible, not only to the specialists, but say they're looking for a job in physical chemistry, sitting in the audience making a decision on whether to offer them a job, or organic chemists and inorganic chemists. If they've got a bone of sense in their head, they got to make some part of their lecture intelligible to those other people sitting in the audience, while at the same time making an impression on the experts. It's an interesting task. Those talks are, of course, naturally much more rehearsed than any other talk. So they are really good. They're much better than the talks by the professors who are doing the work, in whose group the work is done. Okay, this was right. Let's talk about journals a little bit. There is naturally about some pecking order of the journals, meaning there's some, using a metaphor here, field-specific, very field-specific order of quality of the journals. For instance, in inorganic chemistry, the best papers will probably go in JACS and Angewandte Chemie. Angewandte Chemie means applied chemistry, but what's in there is not applied. Science and Nature and Cell have a special thing I'll say something about. Probably next in order are the 2 ACS journals, Inorganic Chemistry, Organometallics, European Journal inorganic chemistry has tried and is just about up to the first two. And then there are poorer journals, and I haven't listed here, of course, the junk journals that all of you get emails about 2 a day about contributing papers to. They have no standing whatsoever in the community. Sometimes we are in the age of bibliometrics, and you're going to have a session about that. So you'll hear some more about this. For the journals, we won't talk here about what are the metrics for the authors, because you've probably heard about them. But for the journals, there is a metric of impact factor. It's not something very complicated. It's a journal has if a journal has an impact factor, let's say of 3 in a given year, it goes by year, aggregated by year. Then what they do is they sum all the papers, the number of papers published in the previous 2 years. So if it's 2008, then they look at how many papers the journal has published in 2000, 2007, 6 and 7. Let's say it's 500. And then they look at all the citations to that journal's papers in 2008 to any paper in that journal. And let's say there are 50. So if there is an impact factor of 3, that means that those 500 papers on average are cited 1,500 times. These numbers vary between 0.1, and the largest citation rates are interesting. The largest citation rates are influenced by the most common of human qualities, and that's laziness. That is, review journals are cited out of proportion a large number of times because people are too lazy to look up the original articles and think they can get away by citing the review journal. Chemical reviews, for instance, the ACS journal has an impact factor of over 30, whereas JACS, a top ACS journal, will have an impact factor of around 12 or 14, or something like that. Any impact factor like 10 is very good for a journal. Even 3 is very good. Here is an interesting statistic, which is very depressing. The average paper published in the world is cited throughout its lifetime, that is forever, by people other than its author. You know why I'm saying that. On an average of 0.5 times. And that's a very impressive statistic in some way. How many articles are published? Of the order of 700,000 a year now, and more than that with the junk journals that are there. So there is the literature is large. You can keep up with it. I'll show you a little bit about how I do it. There is a special position of Science, Nature, and Cell, which has grown in these years, and there is a real problem. In Science, Nature, or Cell, there is a very heavy initial screening prior to review, and the first problem surfaces right there. The editors, who are often scientists or have been scientists, they often screen, they'll not say this, but we know they do. They screen not on a basis of scientific quality, but on a basis of newsworthiness. You know, it's a constructed word, Germanic, but you know what it means, that this will generate some news. They also put in heavy editing. They add the number of enhancers. They make you change the text in order for it to be more newsworthy if it's accepted. just about everything that you can say that is exaggerated will be said about these journals. One of the things also that is, so they have a high quality basis, but you can see they have the problems of a business, basically. Nature is a business. So you say you have a brand, the brand is nature. Substitute for nature Coach or Chanel, doesn't matter. You have a brand. Now you want to sell more of it. So you can keep the brand high, but you also want to create an offshoot of Chanel that the rest of the universe thinks is like Chanel in quality, but really isn't. It's got poorer ingredients. That's what nature has done by having nature physics, nature materials, nature geosciences, and even what is the other one where the really cheap thing of the brand is the nature communications and other things like that. I can't tell you too much about this, but I can't tell you enough bad about these journals. All of what I can tell you is you can get a Nobel Prize without publishing a single paper in Nature or Science, and you can still do it today. So I'm going to tell you to stay away. How could I, when certain universities in China are giving you a $20,000 bonus for publishing a paper? There is a discussion you can find on the web about the monetary rewards of publishing in different journals by Chinese universities. It differs by the quality of the university also. And China is not the only villain in this piece. There is a changing nature of publication with the World Wide Web and the internet. One thing I've already mentioned are bogus journals, and I don't have to tell you about them. If you are a PhD student and someone invites you because of your expertise to write a paper in the study of appendicitis, and you are in material science, you know where that is coming from. The terrible thing is the attempted capture of the open source model by the bogus journals. This is a real travesty. And we could talk about open source journals. They are coming in various ways, and there are interesting philosophical issues and social science issues around them. The other thing is preprint service. You will hear a version. You will also have a session about arXiv here, which is a Cornell product now, and which has really caught on in physics and astronomy and mathematics, and is in the process of things catching on in chemistry. Hasn't until recent times. There have been 2 abortive attempts. I think most of you know what arXiv is. There are interesting problems with arXiv. I'm skeptical about it because of the problems, but I'll reserve that maybe if I'm around for the discussion when you talk about it. Essentially, it's submission of a paper that has not been reviewed, and you can, until recently, the chemistry journals would not accept submissions of those papers. The chemistry journals, if it was submitted to arXiv, they've now almost all gone back on that, and it's okay to send it to arXiv. One of the main sources, one of the main things about it is, which is both its attraction and a problem, is that it's used to establish priority more than anything else. And that summarizes what is the problem with it. One interesting thing is blogs. So blogs have caught on in the rest of the internet world, rest other than science. But now, for the first time, only now, in my opinion, are there beginning to be intelligent blogs which add value in science. I don't like them. Again, because they're not reviewed, but they add value. For me, they add value they help me keep up with the literature. That's why they add value. They say, here is something interesting. And I could point you specifically in my field, theoretical chemistry, to two blogs that I think recently bridged that point of being interesting. There's access to data and archival storage, which will be discussed. This is an obligation which the NSF makes people do to submit a data management plan as part of your proposal. Let me tell you why. Nothing in the United States happens unless there is a monetary or other reason. The reason we have to have in these kinds of things, access to data, archival storage, is because we are a society where people sue each other in order to do things. So what happened was there was an Nsf Biomedical Grant, and it came out with a result. One of the papers published from it was that a certain drug produced by a certain company was ineffective. When that paper was published, the drug manufacturer sued NSF to get the results of the tests in detail, including the patient identification and statistics. And unfortunately, the principal investigator was sloppy and did not have those things. They won the suit in the NSF. The government had to pay a lot. And ever since then, everyone else, even theoretical chemists who produce terabytes of data every day as a result of our calculations, they have to keep those calculations someplace. No one's ever going to look at them. But this is part of being an analyticus society. And that's where we are. How to read or keep up with the literature. So in the good old days, I had a picture. So none of my pictures have come out. It's okay. That's why I wanted to use my computer. There was a picture of me in the old physical sciences library, which is now a study space and a classroom space. And I was standing at a place where there were journals out for the week. And so here is the system. Here is how I kept up with the literature. Literature was vast then. It's vaster now. I think it's within reach. I'll tell you the statistics for my doing it, and with that, it's still within reach. And I think it's going to be within the literature of science would have actually stabilized. What I'm talking about is those 700,000 articles a year that get published, how to keep up with them. Okay? The literature would have stabilized if it had not been for the exponential growth of China and India in producing that literature. It would have stabilized because Europe and the United States, there is a limit to how many articles a human being can write. Per day, per month, whatever you want. But the population not yet fully into science was vast, and so it's still growing exponentially at this point. It will stabilize one day as the population of the Earth stabilizes. But we are still heading. We're heading soon for 1 million articles a year in the science, in chemistry. In chemistry and related fields. In the old days, the journals would come in physical form. They'd come in, they'd get published every month, typically. And they'd get the librarians would date stamp them. I I wanted that. I'll tell you why. And when the journal would come in the library, they'd be put on the shelves for a week, on a certain shelf at the front of the library for 1 week. At the end of that, they would be taken off and put on shelves which were over here for 1 year. At the end of that year, they would be bound and put on the shelves in the library. I knew that the new journals came in on Monday, started to come in on Monday, Tuesday. So if I went in on Saturday or Sunday to the library, in the beginning, I would go in every day. I was so excited about it. If I went in Saturday and Sunday, I would catch all the new journals that came during that week. And there were maybe 100. So I'd read them. It would take me a few hours. So now you don't have that. How to keep up with it? I'll show you let's see if I have it. I don't, those have actually disappeared. So we're going to try. Can we have the IT person here? Oh, we can't do it.
We'll definitely post these slides.
Yeah. Now I want to show you, let's see. I want to connect my computer. I don't care about your other room. We care about the people here. They can come down here. Let's see.
You're on now. The login.
Yeah, do we need this?
No.
You have it. Yeah. Okay, let's see. I think I can, no, okay. Bear with me for a moment. We have the slide. Okay. F8. You can see it on the side. That's good.
Which side did you want on?
Yeah, let me just, I will turn it full screen first. Okay, now you can see I want to show the pictures. First thing, you see the cut and paste here, the original document. You can tell that up there, the different handwriting styles of my postdoc and me in this cut and paste document that we had. You can see the detail in which we did the drawings initially, and from that sketch, someone could take them over. Here are all the figure captions collected on one page.
I can put it on the big screen.
Okay, put it on the big screen. There we go. Yes, good. Here are all the figures connected, but you don't know what the figures are about. That's what the editors want, what the technical editors want. And not only do the technical editors want that, but people give it. This is, of course, another problem, which is nature and science particularly bad at. Nature and science, particularly bad at. 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 people should be reading something like a continuous thing of text and picture. No, all the figures are collected into one, made as small as possible. As small as possible. Now, the rationale is anyone who's really interested can enlarge them to any size. But of course, that's not the idea. We want to get everyone interested in it. And okay, now I come to, here's what I wanted to show you. There's a picture of me, and the guy has a lot more hair. And he's standing at this table where you see the physical print issues, which no longer exist. So this is around 1970 or so, 5 years after I came. And that's how my journal, keeping up with the journals. Because here is how I keep up today. And I'm going to try to actually do this in real time. I am not entirely sure I can do that. Just give me a second and I will try. What I need to go is to the internet, which I can usually get through connecting up to Eduroam. It says that I'm connected to Eduroam. Let's see. I will go to the old reader. Yes, I am. Yes. Okay, I'm in a program which is called an RSS aggregator. I don't know what RSS stands for. But what these are is these are things that connect, that gather up links and tables of contents from journals. They're very easy to get to. The one I'm in is called The Old Reader. The reason it's called The Old Reader is because there was once a Google Reader. It is in the nature of Google that it introduces 10 products and then junks 9 of them after it's gotten people addicted to using all 10 of them. And the old Google Reader was a wonderful program, but they couldn't figure out a way to make money from it. It's as simple as that. So they did away with it. So it was a good product, so some other people based a company called The Old Reader on it. The Old Reader collects journals, and you can see on the left, I'm trying to show with an arrow here, some of the journals: Canadian Journal of Chemistry, Angewandte Chemie, Advanced Synthesis. I have a list here of 100 journals or so, give or take 10. Each of those journals every day feeds in its tables of contents and links to this. So here is Chemical Communications. So I'll go to another journal. Let's say Angewandte Chemie. And I connect up to it. And it gives me you can choose what you want to do, but it gives me an abstract. If there is a graphical abstract, it will give it too. It sort of shows me, depending on the size of the screen, 3 abstracts. Of course, the title and the authors, but also the actual abstract. And if I were to go to this, it actually gives me a link to the paper. And if my library has a subscription, I can open that paper. Good. Okay, so now that's not the most important thing it does. The most important thing it does is, as I scroll down through these, it changes the font from boldface to plain face. That's the most important thing this does. The reason it's most important is my problem in going through. So how many articles do I go through? I go through about 2,000 articles a week. Okay? I don't go through them, but I have seen them if I'm going to go through 2000, my main problem is not what I see, but to be sure that I don't see again what I saw before. Because I choose, like any human being, not to remember 1990 of those 2000. Okay? So I have to have a system. This gives me a system. In the old days, it was by going away for a week and not coming back to the library. But this is the equivalent. This is my own equivalent of doing the library search. So from those 2000 articles, so how long does it take me to scan through 2000 abstracts? I don't read the abstract. I read the title. And then I decide whether to read the abstract. I'm no different from what you are in this. But how long does it take me to go through 2000 articles? There are 3 or 4, depends on your screen, how big your screen is. There's a limit to how much a human eye can take in something. But it takes me 3 hours to go through 2000 articles. So that's my investment in time. And out of those 2000 articles, I'll stop and look at the abstracts of about 30. And out of those 30, I will take 5 and send them on to my coworkers. Tell you the reason why. And I'll open for myself those 5 and print them out. Why do I send them to my coworkers? So I know how to read the literature by now, and I'll tell you how to get started on this in just a second. But the problem is how to get your students. That's not your problem, but it's my problem. My problem is how to get the students to read the literature. There is no better way to get your graduate students or undergraduates, if you're in that situation, or postdocs, to read the literature than to send them an article, a new article from a literature in the field of their thesis research before they see it. If you do this twice, they will never allow you to get into this situation before, because it is a shaming situation. You should have seen that and brought it to the group meeting. And I have seen it before you. It tells them that I'm watching, tells them that I'm alive. It tells them it's obvious. So that this is the reason why I sent it to the graduate students right away. It's the way we keep up the dialogue outside of group meetings. Okay, so this looks intimidating. There's this list of journals on the left. So here's how you get started, and then I'll finish. The way to get started is you don't start with 100. This is what happens after 50 years and of being interested in various parts of chemistry, too many different parts. What you do is you start with 0 in this, and then you look, and as you're writing your first papers, or as you're reading the papers, and make for yourself a simple rule. If you find yourself in your other way of looking at things, of going 5 times to a given journal, like Journal of the American Chemical Society, you go 5 times, but you don't go, let's say, to organometallic chemistry 5 times. So you don't put it. So every time you go to 5 or 10 or whatever number you set for yourself, you add them to this list. This list builds slowly in your lifetime onto whatever you want. It's built through utility, which is the best way to do this. Okay, now to get out of this, I have to I have to get back to, no, let's see, close. Enter, yeah. I'm trying to get back to it, yeah. Or let's say, okay, so this is a little about, more about citation practice. I didn't get a chance to talk to you about what you do if someone else publishes the same work that you have done. We haven't talked about plagiarism. We haven't talked about there being on a reviewer end of papers. And most important, we haven't talked about how to write better scientific papers. I'll be glad to talk to you sometime about that too. But I just wanted to give you a general idea about all the things that go into the actual publication process. I think you'll get much more today. Thank you.